my favorite tool is what we call stop, listen, confirm. The magic to that whole thing is the confirm statement. The trick is get your mind out of, oh, look, someone's got a problem. How do I solve it? Get out of that fix it mode and get into understanding mode. And the simple brain hack to do that is the confirm statement, which is you sound blank, which is an emotion because of blank. And then ask the question, do I have that right?
Welcome to Voice Activated, the podcast dedicated to unlocking the power of employee feedback. I'm Sean Fitzpatrick, founder of Telemap and your host. In each episode, we'll dive into real-world examples and best practices, as well as some lessons learned from employee surveys, pulse checks, focus groups, 360s, and more. If people are at the heart of your business, you're in the right place. Expect open conversations, practical advice, inspiring stories from companies that are getting it right, and some reflections from those who've hit a few bumps along the way. Tune in, listen up, and let's activate the voice of your employees. When we talk about leadership, the conversation often drifts towards charisma or strategy or maybe performance metrics, and we celebrate the leaders really who inspire and can execute and win in the workplace. But what if the most impactful thing a leader can be is approachable? Today's guest has spent decades working with the intersection between leadership, culture, labor relations, and he's seen firsthand the distance between leaders and teams don't just create disengagement, it can actually create quite a bit of risk. Phil Wilson is the CEO of LRI Consulting and founder of Approachable Leadership. He's the author of a number of books, including Left of Boom, the Approachability Playbook, and the upcoming Leader Shift Playbook, which really breaks down 4 mindset shifts every leader needs to have to unleash team potential. He's also worked with a number of organizations to help reduce turnover, reduce conflict, and even help prevent or improve union relations or labor relations. In this episode, we're going to unpack why closing that power distance is one of the most effective and often overlooked ways to drive change in culture, and why approachability isn't just a soft skill, it's truly a leadership advantage. Phil, welcome to Voice Activated.
Thanks, Sean. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Let's dive right in here and let's look at this concept because you use it in one of your books as a title, and we've talked about it before. What does this concept of approachability actually mean inside this leadership context?
Well, we've done a lot of research on approachability, Sean, and when I first sort of went down the rabbit trail of learning about leadership, one of the questions I asked is what is the one ring to rule them all? I'm a total nerd, right? So it's what's the one leadership tool that's more important than all of them? And I ended up landing on this idea of approachability, and it's not just me. I had an intern, Cameron Brown, who ended up getting his PhD, and he wrote his dissertation around approachability. And one of the big questions we asked were 2 big questions he asked in his dissertation was, is this different than, say, being a good steward? Is this different than transformational leadership? Is this something unique? And the answer was yes. And then sort of where did it fit? And the answer there was that it is a foundational component of being a strong leader. And what the research finds is that if you are approachable, so being approachable means your teammates feel safe and comfortable coming to you. If they've got a suggestion, if they've got a concern, they feel comfortable coming to you, their leader, right? That's at its core is basically what that means. And what the research finds is that if you get that part right, if your employees that you lead say, my leader's approachable, you have vastly different outcomes than if they say you're not. And not only that, you get a little bit of a pass for kind of the rest of the stuff that leaders are supposed to do. So you can be kind of ham-fisted at all of the sort of day-to-day boxes that you have to check as a supervisor, as long as you get this approachability foundation right. And then the flip side's also true, Sean. You if you're not approachable, you could get all the rest of the boxes checked right, and you're going to have still a bunch of negative consequences. People are going to quit. People are not going to engage in organizational citizenship. They're not going to be engaged in their work. There's a lot of negative consequences if you could just get that one box right.
Right. So I like how you talked about that sort of as a foundational component, because there's a lot of leadership models out there, and you touched on a couple of them with transformational leadership and, these types of things. So is it the concept that it really is part of almost every leadership model, or is it in and of itself sort of a way to think about leadership, or a model that you see out there that would be added to that set of models that leaders look at and think about?
If you look at servant leadership, for example, a big part of that is humility, and there's approachability behaviors that are certainly embodied in most of these models. Transformational means like you're going to be inspiring, but being inspiring also includes listening to people, and includes making sure that people feel like they are kind of part of the journey. So there's approachability behaviors that are kind of inside all of the models. But one of the questions that we asked was, is this something that's unique? And the answer was yes. And we actually looked at a number of other, different leadership models, including the two we just mentioned, and identified like this is different. And yeah, so it's look, good leadership sort of, there's a lot of different ways to define it. There's a lot of different ways to kind of come at it. They certainly share, the best models share pieces with each other. And really our goal and our focus is first level leaders. So there's a difference between, a CEO is also, I'm a CEO, like I'm a first level leader to people on my team, but we really focus in our own work on that very, a frontline supervisor, especially. What is it that they can do to be the best that they can be, and to be that kind of person again, where their team feels safe and comfortable coming to them, and their team feels safe and comfortable, being themselves. Those are the kinds of things that happen if you are approachable.
It sort of overlaps even a little bit with I think it's Amy Edmondson, psychological safety, right? That concept of feeling okay to bring up things that may not be, maybe considered taboo, or, the unspoken, we don't talk about the elephant in the room, but that's really what you're talking about here is sort of creating that safety, or that environment where people feel they can do that, and it'll be helpful for the business, not hurtful for them as a career limiting move type of thing.
Absolutely. You have to feel that safety, and before you're gonna, if you don't feel comfortable bringing up, like you said, a touchy subject, a subject that's uncomfortable, a subject that might be a little scary to bring up, then what's going to happen is you are going to avoid a lot of subjects, and so it's really incumbent on the leader, even though sometimes those conversations might be challenging. If you're not showing the ability and willingness to kind of have those conversations, and by the way, you have to be vulnerable yourself and be willing to, you don't have all the answers, and being able to step into that if you can't do that, then there's a lot of stuff that you're never going to hear. And it could be a suggestion. It could be two people that are having a fight that could ultimately result in a huge problem at work. It could be a safety issue that everybody's ignoring that could create a crisis. Like there's hundreds of examples every single day that are information that people know, that people could disclose and make a choice whether they're going to disclose it or not. And that choice almost always comes down to the relationship they have with their leader.
Interesting. Yeah, it's so important to have that open relationship, and organizations and leaders struggle with it. I know in the playbook you outline a number of essential sort of habits that leaders. I think there's 3 of them, essential habits that good leaders should have. Which which of those habits do they seem to struggle with the most? Or maybe you could outline them and then talk about, which one seems to be the hardest and why.
Well, the model that we teach, and again, there's different ways to describe this, but the way that we've kind of categorized it as a simple way to get across, like these are the types of things that you need to be doing, is the first thing that's most important is openness or creating the right space. And that is things like, are you available? When people come to you, do you act like they're an interruption or are you welcoming? We talk a little bit about, you should always feel like you're walking around with a welcome mat in front of you all the time. So those are openness behaviors or right space. The second area is understanding or creating what's called the right feeling. So that's how good of a job do you do listening? How good of a job do you do actually trying to understand? It's just like Covey taught, right? Seek to understand before seeking to be understood. Those those behaviors are in that middle section. And then the third area is support or what we call right action. And in that support bucket, this is, do you walk your talk? Do you follow up and follow through? Are you truly, asking the kinds of questions that are going to get problems solved and then helping get them solved? That's the third bucket. And you have to do all three. And so those are, the true habits, and there's sort of daily practices, that you can stack on each of these. But the basic habits are, am I being open? Am I being understanding and seeking to understand? And then am I being supportive, taking right action?
And are all of them sort of easily grasped by managers? Do they struggle more with one than the other? Like openness is, I could see that one, people, well, my door's open. I have an open door policy. You hear about that all the, often is, well, what's wrong? Why are they uncomfortable? Don't they know we have that policy or concept or whatever? So that's one thing. And then you also hear about listening. That's one of the harder skills, for a lot of leaders to have is really truly understanding and listening. Because often we do surveys and employee feedback, and when we get feedback back from about their manager or about leaders, often, well, they don't listen. They don't, consider our ideas. We're not consulted on suggestions and ways to improve and these types of things. Or there's sort of areas that they have to improve or don't do some of these really well or struggle with, or do they have to be done in order?
Well, my favorite tool around that last thing you just talked about is what we call stop, listen, confirm. And the magic to that whole thing is the confirm statement. And so anytime someone comes to you, if you want to get rated as a good listener, if you could just do this one thing, you will transform the listening that happens. And by the way, this doesn't just work at work. This works at home, and with your kids and with your spouse. And I don't do it enough at home, but the trick is get your mind out of, oh, look, someone's got a problem. How do I solve it? Get out of that fix it mode and get into understanding mode. And the simple brain hack to do that is the confirm statement, which is you sound blank, which is an emotion because of blank. And then ask the question, do I have that right? You sound blank because of blank. Do I have that right? Before you can ever say anything else to this person about trying to solve a problem, you just make that statement. And that the magic of that statement is, first of all, it turns off the part of your brain that tries to solve problems because you've given it a different problem to solve, which is to put an emotion into that first blank. And the part of your brain that's trying to identify emotions is a different side than the fix it side. And once you start giving your brain that problem to solve, most people are uncomfortable. Not everyone, but most people are uncomfortable having a conversation about emotions. So what happens is you start stalling to figure out what the emotion is. And the stalled tactics that you're going to use is active listening tactics. You're going to be like, oh, tell me more. Let me make sure that I understand that. Now you said this. Is that is that related to this other thing that you said? Like those are all the sorts of things that you would teach someone in a class about listening that naturally happen if you just try to answer that first part of the phrase. And then the because of blank is just your quick summary of the emotion is, you feel angry, you feel frustrated, you feel overlooked, you feel overwhelmed because of, and then insert what they just told you that made you come up with that emotion, and then ask, you got it right. And honestly, whether you get it right or not isn't exactly the point. Like, hopefully you listen carefully enough that you got close to what the emotion, but they will tell you, yes, you got it right, or well, I'm not overwhelmed. I could do it. It's really frustrating. Like they'll give you the answer. And then the other magic thing, Sean, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, a whole heck of a lot of the time, they did not come to you for you to fix a problem. They came to you because they wanted to feel listened to. And as soon as you go to fix it mode, you're forgetting, you're skipping over the part that they really care about. And most of the time they even know what the solution is, or they might know there is no solution. They just would like to talk to you about it. So that's probably one of my favorite tips for listening. And it's not a magic pill, but it's almost, for leadership, it's about as close as you can get to one.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that stop, listen, confirm, and that concept of, restating them. You sound frustrated, or you sound angry, or you sound, you know, whatever that emotion is, and then stating back what you understand the challenge or the problem to be. I really, that's really simple. I could see a lot of managers being able to like grasp onto that, because that's something that's very, very tactical that they could use.
We try to keep it like that. It's look, it's so, I mean, the worst job in any company, let's be fair, right? The worst job is the frontline supervisor. They are, they're being pounded on from above about produce this, get this quality number, on and on and on. They're struggling with, do I even have like my team here today? And how am I, just how am I going to get through the day? And then, their team is barking back up at them about, like, we don't have enough people and we don't have enough resources and all of that. So that job is so difficult. If you can't make, like, leadership is hard, and it can be very complicated, or it certainly can be explained in a very complicated way. You have to give people just super simple tactical things that are easy to do, especially for that frontline supervisor.
Yeah, absolutely. And that really aligns with the data we've been collecting particularly for the last probably 5+ years now. Is we can go and measure different levels within the organization around engagement, satisfaction, retention, those types of things. And what we notice is, obviously executives, they tend to have high levels of engagement because they have good autonomy. They've been doing maybe their job for a while. They have a lot of control over their day and, what their work and initiatives are going to be. And employees, so individual contributors, have pretty high levels, or depending on the industry and the function and so on, lower than the executives, but pretty good. But when we see the next level of manager, the frontline manager, they tend to have the lowest level of engagement. And we've noticed that's dropped over the years. It's gone down. It hasn't gone up. Exactly for those reasons. They're being sort of pushed on from both ends. The expectation from employees have gone up over the years, right? We expect a lot more out of the workplace. And there's a lot more expectation with, getting more done with less from senior executives. And those frontline leaders, frontline supervisors, they're really being squeezed. So any tools that can be useful for them, I think, are well received, because it's a challenging job.
They get the least resources, even around training. I mean, the classic mistake, and I mean, Sean, every train wreck that we walk into, usually at the core of it is, you promote your highest performers as individual contributors. You promote them into a supervisor position with zero, first of all, even thinking about would they be a good leader. You don't give them any training, and they have like one tool in the toolbox, which is like, I perform really, really good. And now they're in charge of a department of people, none of whom can do as good of a job as they did. And really the only thing that they have to sort of judge people on is just like, wow, you're just terrible at this job. Like, I could work circles around you, and here's all the things you're doing wrong. And they don't really have any other tool. Like, you are building into your system crappy supervision, and then you're scratching your head as to, like, why can't we retain anyone.
Why can't we execute? Why can't we get,
Yeah.
implement and to some of our direction and strategies? Yeah. What's also interesting, you often talk about, and I think you've said it one time, leadership isn't always about tools. It's about beliefs. And it'd be interesting if you could share some examples of belief systems, which is a little bit about what you're talking about, approachability, but maybe there's more to it than that. It'd be interesting to hear.
Yeah, the new book is called The Leader Shift Playbook, and one of the shifts that I talk about is your belief in others. And to me, when I talked about looking for the one ring to rule them all, the second place behind approachability is this idea of the hero assumption. And so the hero assumption is just simply nobody wakes up in the morning thinking they're the villain of the story. So your belief as a leader in your team is really important. And there's all kinds of research. The Pygmalion research is probably the best example. But like, if you believe somebody is going to perform poorly, you are going to behave differently around them. So you're going to micromanage them. You're going to have a lot of rules. You're going to constantly be like looking over their shoulder. If you believe someone wants to be great, then you are going to behave, and your words, everything is going to be different in your interactions with that person. And I think most of us, if we're really honest, if you think about like employees that you like and employees that you don't like, you will notice that you say and do things differently around those two employees. And the basic idea of the hero assumption is you don't have the luxury of making that villain assumption about anybody. And that doesn't mean that everybody is on the hero's journey and is going to be wildly successful in their job, but you will be shocked at the turnaround that you can have in somebody who maybe at one point you didn't have a lot of belief in. That if you can just switch your mindset, they will rise to the occasion. And we tell a lot of people to just think in your own life, like, and that could be a coach, could be a teacher, it could be a parent or grandparent. There are people in your life, and they might be somebody that you worked with, people in your life that there was a point where they saw something in you that you didn't see in yourself. And that is often the turning point in many people's lives. Lots of people who are leaders can pinpoint not just the person, but like the moment that that person said or did that thing that showed, I believe in you. And that's the hero assumption at work. And so I talk in the book about a bunch of different examples of that, but that is, to me, the most important belief that a leader can have. There's a lot of different ways to describe it, sort of theory X and theory Y. I like to talk about the placebo effect versus the nocebo effect, but like at the end of the day, it's this: do you believe in your team? And that belief will create the reality. And the flip side is, if you don't believe in your team, that belief will also create a reality. It's just a reality you don't want to be in.
I like that concept of hero assumption. And it's how do you get a manager to think that way? Because they might go, yeah, that sounds good. But then they get into a meeting or they go into something and they go, this person didn't do this and didn't do that and didn't, it's just it's somewhat human nature to look at all the things, all the gaps, all the things that are missing, not the things that are done well. So that's a hard mind shift to enact, but boy, it can be really powerful. It'd just be interesting is how do you get managers taking that first step towards some of that stuff?
It's not easy. I talk about so that's an earlier mind shift that I talk about in the book, but the idea of the pattern interrupt, right? So a pattern interrupt is where you notice that you have a habit of thinking. And before we get into pattern interrupt, I always talk about there's these like two additional bugs in the system that everyone has, and so the first one's actor observer bias, which means that if you fail, you have 100 excuses as to why you've failed. But if you see someone else failing, you have one thing that you think, which is just like, that person's a loser. That person doesn't know what they're doing. Like, you make a judgment about the person without thinking about all the other context that might have led to them to the situation that they're in. And that's just because you don't have that context for them, but you do have it for you. And then the second bug is confirmation bias, which is like, once you've decided somebody is a loser, you only pay attention to information that confirms your belief that they're a loser. And the flip side of confirmation bias is you also ignore evidence that contradicts that they are a loser, and so it creates this spiral. And that goes back to the hero assumption. You just don't have the luxury of doing it. And so, to your question, this is another like simple tactical thing. You have to embed this idea of the pattern interrupt. If you catch yourself in a situation where you're starting to go down the slippery slope of this person is flawed, this person is a failure, you have to catch yourself, and then the easiest thing to do is just flip it, right? This person's made a mistake, and you're kind of getting into the, oh, well, there they go again, they don't understand, and you've got to flip that into, this is a great opportunity. We have a great chance here to learn, and you just have to like be able to flip it. So the first thing is to notice that you're going down the road, and that's really, you're right. That's not easy to do, and that can become a pretty ingrained habit. So you have to notice it. Going back to approachability, one really good way to notice it more is to let your team know, this is something I'm working on. And if you see me kind of going down the path of starting to, act like you don't know what you're doing, please like alert me, and then give me a chance to turn it around. That right there that will change tons and tons of relationships, and it gets you out of the habit. And once you start catching yourself, you don't have to catch yourself very often. Like once you start catching yourself and you give your team permission to catch you, you'll stop doing it.
So it's a big part of it is just that awareness, starting to build the awareness, know that you're doing it this way, and having that pattern interrupt tool to sort of, okay, I got to stop and sort of just think about how I'm approaching things. Just having that awareness around you, and that's sort of one of the biggest leadership values or things that are valuable to leaders is to be aware of your presence and the way you think and the way you approach things, which is a lot different from what often an individual contributor has to contend with. Yeah.
I mean, I started the leadership book talking about me being on the top of Mount Stupid. If you know the Dunning-Kruger effect curve, that the worst part of that curve is right at the beginning, where you know some about the subject, but you think you know a lot. And I was at the tip of Mount Stupid, and the moment that I got the feedback that even though I was going around teaching people around the country about being approachable and this model and all this stuff, I came to the realization, because someone on my team was courageous enough and willing to tell me the truth, that I was not being a good leader here. Like I was the problem. And that was a tough conversation. But that was probably one of the most important conversations that have ever happened to me in my professional career, because that's what got my attention. And we've transformed our culture here at my own company, doing a lot of the things that I was teaching other people to do, but that I wasn't really doing myself. And so that self-awareness is really, really important. And the people that are willing to give you that tough feedback, those are gifts in your life. And so then, how do you get more of those gifts? You have to ask for them. Please tell me what am I doing that's working? What am I doing as your leader that's not working? What should I do more of? What should I stop doing? But asking people that and being willing to accept that feedback and then act on that feedback is the key to being a good leader.
That's great, because I know often when we're sharing survey results and rolling out results with different leaders and teams and managers, that's one of the very first things we start with is really, approach it as feedback is a gift, because sometimes survey results are good, sometimes not so good, and it can vary by department, by manager, by leader, all of that stuff. And you have to have them in the mindset of, oh, this is a problem because of these group of employees. That's why things are good. And it's like, no,
Or it's
it is what it is.
it's the question wording, right?
Exactly.
Once you start talking about like, oh, this question wasn't worded well, it's like,
Yeah.
oh,
Going down a hole that's not going to help you. Yeah, exactly. Um, I know we talked a lot about approachability and sort of leadership mindsets, and there's some really great nuggets in there. I do want to touch on one thing that you do have a lot of experience with, and that's dealing with unions and labor relations. And it's sort of top of mind here in Canada because we just went through a process here in Canada where the flight attendants walked off the job, shut down the whole airline for the last couple of days. They were just ordered back to work about 2 days ago, and of course they continued to picket and didn't go back. And eventually, it was deemed as an illegal strike, and they went to arbitration. And last night, within the less than 24 hours ago, they finally came to an agreement, and I guess flights are starting to go out again today. So it would be interesting to hear, how do you go about helping organizations address issues, before they explode? I think what you call left of boom. And I guess, what's a boom moment look like in a culture, and how do you help leaders think about it or get ahead of it? It'd be interesting to hear your perspective on that.
Well, a strike is for sure a boom event in the life of a company, right? So that's a place where the relationships between the company and the union have completely unraveled and broken apart. And I don't know I don't know tons about that specific example, but I can certainly generalize and have been involved around lots of situations like that. And usually there's plenty of blame to go around. That's first. We live in a world where it's actually extremely difficult to be like the leaders of a union, because you can kind of lose control even of your own folks that you represent. It might feel like you have a reasonable offer that you recommend. This happened at Boeing just recently here in the States, but that still gets rejected by the members, and the members sometimes will even go after their own leadership. The flip side of that's also true. The relationship between the company and the union that represents its employees, that relationship is extremely important and valuable. And there's lots and lots of bargaining, even in today's really kind of fractious labor environment, that gets settled without a strike, that gets settled without a giant fight. And a lot of times that comes down to the relationship and companies understanding that the union has a job to do. The goal of the bargaining is to try to get to the best result for both sides, and also understanding the union has a political role, right? They are, especially here in the U.S., they are running for office, so you can't treat them in a way that makes them look bad to their constituents, or you are going to have a fight, right? And then the flip side of that is unions, a lot of times, they kind of default into management is evil, management is the enemy, and that can create a lot of negative consequences, both, of course, in your relationship with the partner, right? If you're calling them the devil all the time, like,
Yeah, we
they're
versus them type of mindset.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But even with your members, right? Like, it's hard to get your members, like, once you have gotten a deal, it's hard to go back to the members and go, "Oh, the guys that we were telling you are, the worst humans on earth, they're actually okay, and we got a deal, and we need you to ratify it," right? So there's a lot that you can do relationship-wise on both sides of the table. It requires work. It requires recognition that each side has a role to play, and each side has its own goals and its own interests, and trying to match those together is critical. And then the other side on the labor relations, if you don't want to have a union and don't want to be in a situation where your employees get called out on strike, the number one thing you can do is all the stuff we've talked about so far. If you listen to your teammates and you respond to what they say and you try to create a great workplace, they are not going to want to have a union. They don't need to pay somebody else to try to create the workplace that you've already created, right? The reason people seek out a union is because a union is not the first thing that they came up with, right? They have voiced, that's the whole point of this podcast, right? They have voiced probably a bunch of different ways to try to solve a problem, and that never worked. And then they finally get down to the bottom of the list, and it's like, okay, well, I guess we're going to have to unionize. And that's when unions get into companies. So this was, a company that faces a union organizing campaign. Generally speaking, it's not every campaign's like this, but the vast majority of them are situations where employees have complained, employees have brought up issues, employees have tried other ways to solve their concerns, and it has fallen on deaf ears. And so they finally are like, we need somebody to speak for us, and we're willing to pay a union to do that because this is what they do for a living. And like, that's how you get there.
Mm. Yeah, so they sort of left it, management just left it linger for so long to the point where it's a point of no return in cases like that. Yeah, interesting. Couple of just closing questions here. I know we talked about in mine in the book, leadership book about mindset, and we touch a little bit about awareness to know when you have the right mindset and how to develop that. We also talked in your approachability playbook just about managers have to work on being approachable. I guess one thing would be interesting, how does a manager know, or how does he become aware, or she become aware, they become aware if they're approachable or not approachable? It wouldn't be surprising if we asked them, do you feel like you're approachable? And they say, well, yes, I'm very approachable. But then if you ask those employees, is your manager no, God, don't bring up that topic or this topic. So it'd be interesting to think about is there any telltale signs or signals that a manager could use and say, you know what, I really got to understand how to become more approachable, because even though I think I am, I'm not. What are indicators, if any, that you could point to?
Oh, there's plenty. So number one, do people approach you? Like, how often do people come up? And I'm not like, hey, let's talk about the weather, or let's talk about what happened in sports this weekend. I mean, how often do people come to you with concerns, suggestions, feedback? Like, how often does that actually happen? And you can just reflect back on the prior week or month and tick off a list of how many times that happened. Not a question about, what's the production number for the, not like those, but where you've been approached about either a touchy subject, or asking for feedback, or receiving feedback, or those kinds of conversations. So that's number one. If you really, so number two, you already brought it up. Ask your team, do you think I'm approachable? Right. And that can be done in a survey. It can be done. We have a number of different tactics that we use to be able to get feedback about how approachable am I. A great way to do this, we have like a little just set of cards that we use in our workshop that have a bunch of behaviors on them that are behaviors of approachable leaders. And you can actually just have people put down, like, what are the 3 things here that you think I do good? And then what are 3 things here that you think I could work on? And if people are willing to give you that feedback, so that helps you understand whether you're approachable or not. So that's the second thing. And then if you, I'll just give you 3, there's others, but like, if you only get bad news, like nobody ever talks to me about anything until the whole building's on fire, I'm so frustrated. If you ever feel like that, you are not approachable, because people are waiting people are avoiding talking to you until there's really no other choice. So that is another signal that if you feel out of the loop all the time, that's another signal that you're not approachable.
Interesting. Yeah. That people just aren't sort of giving you updates about what's working, what isn't working on a regular basis, and not really expecting you to dive in and act on it, just to be aware. I like that last one too. That's really good. I think you got some very, very fantastic touch points for managers and tactics and ideas you came out. So we're some real gems in this podcast, in this call. I guess I can ask you one last question. If our listeners could just walk away with just one shift to become more approachable, a more impactful leader, what's that one thing that you would leave them with?
Make the hero assumption. That to me is if you can make that shift, everything else falls into place, because that shift changes your words, it changes the way you behave, it changes your assumptions about your team. So that's not an easy shift to make, but that one has definitely the most impact. And your job will become so much more both valuable. It's going to feel so much better. You'll be way more engaged yourself. You talked about this whole crisis of frontline leaders. Their engagement is as low as it's ever been. That like it's like I said earlier, it's the hardest job. This switch in mindset makes your day go a lot better. You're going to have you're going to be a lot more energized, a lot more engaged, have way better conversations, even in the moments where things are going bad, which are going to happen every day. Coming at it from the hero assumption really changes the whole tenor of those conversations. And it gives you access to just like all these resources in the universe that, you never get to hear about if you're just blaming the person for how terrible they are at what they do. Like that shift changes a whole lot of things. So make the hero assumption would be my one walkaway point.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. That's fantastic. For our listeners, Philip, tell us more. How could people reach you? And I'm going to put this in the show notes, but how could people reach you? Where do they, if they wanted to learn more about some of your concepts, ideas, suggestions, maybe get a copy of your book, how do they go about doing that?
Well, 3 quick ways. If you're interested in the book, Amazon is probably the first place to stop and just put Leadership Playbook, and that it'll pop right up. Yourleadership.com, just all one word, yourleadership.com kind of tells you everything else around the leadership book and some of the other books that I've written. And then the third way is LinkedIn. We're real active on LinkedIn, and that's a really good place to connect with me. And then you can see other stuff that we're working on. And I was a very early adopter on LinkedIn. So I am, linkedin.com/PB Wilson. So that's me.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you very much. And we'll be talking again soon.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks for listening to Voice Activated. If you've heard something that got you thinking, don't keep it to yourself, share it. Talk about it, put it into play. That's how better workplaces get built. When you're ready to move from insight into action, head over to telemap.com. You'll find tools, resources, and strategies to help you lead better with clarity, empathy, and impact. And make sure to follow or subscribe so you don't miss any more real conversations with leaders who know that some of the best ideas for change don't come from the top, but from those employees closest to the work.